3 weeks is a long time in politics, and it's even longer in a pandemic. But what do you think about the government's measures so far, how it has reacted and moved ahead of events? Pretty good?
Yeah, look, I think the government had a bit of a slow start, in terms of some of the bans that could have been introduced. But you would have to say that the packages that they've put forward, particularly the one passed by Parliament this week, is absolutely the package this country needed to stay afloat. They put aside their previous ideology, put aside their criticisms of previous Labor government spending, and they've said, no, what's most important is saving jobs in Australia, and they deserve absolute support for having thrown away the rule book and saying we've got to do what we've got to do to save jobs in this country.
Yes, absolutely. And we just spoke to Matthias Cormann, and I put to him that, this line that we've heard from Josh Frydenberg, that the government had to draw the line somewhere in terms of spending money and who it supported. Matthias Cormann rejects any notion that they've allowed people to fall through the cracks here. But I think we've seen, state governments put in packages of their own to kind of look after workers and particular businesses that aren't covered by the JobKeeper or Seeker payments.
Well, look, Josh and the Prime Minister rejected a wage subsidy 2 weeks ago or 2.5 weeks ago, and have now introduced the biggest in history in the country. I think that they deserve credit for where they have seen a developing situation getting out of control. They've been prepared to backflip. And I don't say that in a pejorative way. You've got an emerging situation which the premiers are all working through in individual states around landlords and rents. That is a very complex issue. There's complex property rights involved, and the governments are working together to try and find a solution for each state, and that's important. The premiers are talking about tax relief for landlords. Again, the sorts of measures that the Australian public expect at this time. There's no point saving somebody's future job if they've lost where they live, because they're not going to be able to have a stable home environment to be able to keep doing their job.
And we have to remind people, Stephen Conroy as well, that these payments from the government, at whatever level you look at, are not about maintaining your lifestyle as it is at the moment. It's about saving you and keeping you afloat until we see the other side of this thing. The government has been praised for putting ideology aside when it comes to the billions of dollars, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars they've spent in 3 weeks. But we've seen that from unions as well. We've seen all these stakeholders in politics, in unions, in business have to lay their cards on the table, and we've seen really where their politics and their red lines really end, haven't we?
Absolutely. I mean, when you hear that Christian Porter's on the phone daily to Sally McManus at the ACTU, you begin to say the world has changed. I mean, people probably haven't exchanged a cup of tea over all the time they've been in public life. So everyone is pulling together. And the point you made there, Laura, is absolutely the right one. This is not about everyone continuing their lifestyle as normal. It's about what the government have phrased hibernation. And in hibernation, you bunker down, and you've got to be able to survive the worst of it. And that's what the government have set out. They're doing a good job. You've seen a small rise in the unemployment because people have got the confidence because of that JobKeeper package. And that's what it was about. It was about giving people confidence that there is the bridge. I mean, Scott Morrison talked about the bridge to the other side. That JobKeeper package really puts solid foundations into that bridge.
There are opportunities in every crisis. This one will be no different. We talk about federation reform for decades, and it is so hard to get, but perhaps we might see an end to some of those inefficient taxes when we emerge from this crisis. Any come to mind? Are you hopeful in that sense?
Look, I'm a bit battle-hardened on COAG and those sorts of things.
Well, that's the thing. Why does the National Cabinet work so well, but COAG seems so clunky and, ineffective?
Yeah. I've chaired a COAG meeting of communications ministers and IT ministers in the past. And unfortunately, when it comes down to surrendering responsibility, all parties get very, very reluctant to hand power away. We've spent many years saying, look, should we get rid of council or should we get rid of state governments? Even though this crisis is an opportunity, as you said, I wouldn't be confident that we'd see significant change in the taxation structures. I'd like to be proved wrong, but unfortunately I've got a few scars on my back that have said at the end of the day, states will always look after their own citizens before they'll take the national view.
Yes.
In a lot of instances.
There's an adage there about premiers and a
buckets of money.
Exactly.
Right.
Before I let you go, let's talk about, perhaps it's premature, I know, but how the government does pay this extraordinary amount of debt back. Is there now an accord with the Australian public? The government is doing what it can now, that perhaps down the track, when people can afford it, we do a little bit more.
Well, I think that's going to be the only way for us to go forward. We have to have that compact. And the government have got to come clean. I mean, I don't think anyone would criticise the government for softening, withdrawing the tax cuts that they've legislated going forward. The world has changed dramatically in 6 weeks. The economic forecasts have been blown out of the water. The sort of tax cuts that were put in place not that long ago probably aren't sustainable for the budget in the short term. And I think if the government were honest about it and said, look, we put them in place in good faith, we've legislated them, but the world has changed. I think Scott Morrison, with the credit that he's built up, could get away with saying this is an extra pressure on the budget going forward the country can't afford.